Hi, this is Lili Sanderson, and you're listening to Choosing Glory. Thank you for joining me this week. The curriculum covers different chapters in the book of Numbers, and this is what we are going to study in Numbers. So there are a lot of chapters that we don't read, or you can read, of course, or I like to at least read the chapter headings because it gives us an idea, and sometimes it's interesting to go ahead and read some of the other chapters. But the chapters we're covering are chapters 11 through 14, and then 20 through 24, and then chapter 27, which doesn't complete the book of Numbers. There are a few more chapters after that. But anyway, this gives us a pretty good taste of what's going on with the children of Israel in this season. Of course, the name, the book of Numbers, comes from a census that is done of Israel. And there was a census taken at Sinai, right? And it was 603,000, I think, and change. And then the census that's done before they go into Canaan is like 601,000 and change. And considering how many times people are destroyed because of their rebellion in the wilderness, they're only 2,000 short at the end of 40 years. So they did increase, and all the adult males above 20 and over that are military age that were there at the foot of Sinai are killed, except for Caleb and Joshua, which we'll note later. But that whole generation dies off in the wilderness or in one of the purges that happens because of their rebellion, which is, it starts to be kind of cartoonish. Now, I don't want to say that we're a lot better than the children of Israel, because honestly, we have some of the similar or the same kinds of flaws, maybe not to the degree or to the extent that is shown by this group of people. But we also, most of us haven't been slaves for 440 years. Hard to say. Nevertheless, Joshua and Caleb come through spiritually intact, which shows that it can be done. And they were in Egypt in bondage. So I love that. I love that we see that there are reasons for weakness and misbehavior, but that doesn't necessarily constitute an excuse, because there are people who rise above. May we be of that number. Okay, first I am going to talk about some current events today, and I'm going to try to go as fast as I can over this crazy long list, which is by no means comprehensive, because as you know, it's nuts out there. And it did remind me, I had to make sure I looked up the verse in Doctrine and Covenants section 45. It's verse 26 that says this, and I know all this sounds pretty familiar to us today, right? And in that day shall be heard of wars and rumors of wars, and the whole earth shall be in commotion. The whole earth shall be in commotion. And men's hearts shall fail them. And they shall say that Christ delayeth his coming until the end of the earth. We are there, brothers and sisters. I'm not saying that means we won't be there for a while still, but we're definitely there. And again, I've been around long enough to say that when I read these things as a young person in high school, it sounded far off. It was post-World War II by ways, and the world was in a relatively peaceful state for quite a while, and you could still feel the Judeo-Christian orientation in this country. It was, amongst the middle classes at least, it was very terrestrial. And that seemed like these prophecies would take a long time to get to. And here we are. I've been around for a while, what can I say? But we're here. Lots of other verses, of course, talk about that, but that was the one that stood out to me as so good a summary of what's going on. Okay, so I'm just going to try to hit these highlights. If you want more information, it's easy to find online. I also realize that, of course, we're in an information age, so I'm not saying bad things haven't always happened or that there haven't always been corrupt people. Of course there have been. The natural man and Satan, get along really well and stir up all kinds of trouble. But it is more widespread. And while, yes, the internet and all the news agencies and all the, podcasters and everything, give us a ton more information than we would have had back in the days of reading newspapers or watching the evening news. There's no question that evil has increased and religiosity has decreased. We are seeing a little bit of a resurgence in our young men, especially, which is great. Interestingly, they're pretty much mostly Republicans. That's just an interesting stat. And we'll take any resurgence of faith that we see with glad hearts and thanksgiving. It's great when people turn to God and to Christ. So that's wonderful. And of course, the missionary work, the gathering is progressing and really has hit these nations that were dark for a long time. And it's wonderful to see. Okay, but here's some of the crazy. The church, and this isn't crazy, this is good, but the church filed a lawsuit against John DeLynn. He's the guy who does the Mormon Stories podcast, and his company is called Open Stories, it seems, I think. Anyway, they have filed a lawsuit, the church has, against John DeLynn and his Open Stories company, which is the founder of the Mormon Stories podcast, which is all anti-church stuff. He attacks the church all the time. That is the purpose of his podcast. He was excommunicated, I think, in 2015. And even before that, he was doing his nasty stuff and really trying to attack the church and pull people away and highlight people who had left. And often he would highlight, and not that I watched, but I would hear this from people. I guess I did watch a couple of things because I wanted to just get a feel for what he was doing. But he would highlight, like, this is a former bishop, and now he doesn't believe. And here's a, former whatever. People have served in all these callings, and now they know the church is a hoax or whatever. Anyway, very evil spirit. Very evil spirit. And he definitely wants to destroy what he can of belief and faith and the church. So this lawsuit is about copyright infringement. Obviously, even using the word Mormon, the church has tried to be careful about the brand so that people will know what is authorized. And when you have a podcast called Mormon Stories, when I first heard about it, I thought it might be stories of members of the church that were positive or faith promoting or whatever. And then, I quickly learned that that wasn't the case, but you can see how deceptive it is. And then he uses these icons and symbols and so on that are very reminiscent or, similar to some of the icons that the church uses, like the Christ in the archway. That is, the symbol that the church uses on a lot of its materials. He has symbols that are similar to that and other church things as well. So the church apparently did mediation with him, and they've had discussions all over the place. They really are sensitive about the term Mormon, although it sounds like they can't make a total case on that. But apparently, like, they copyrighted the name Mormon Tabernacle Choir even after they changed to the Tabernacle Choir at Temple Square. Because again, they wanted the brand to be protected and clearly associated with the church. And John DeLynn is not cooperating. I mean, apparently he made a few adjustments, but they were asking him to at least do a disclaimer at the beginning of his podcast that said, this is not an official arm of the church, or, I'm not connected, they're affiliated, so that it would be up front before people got too far in. And he didn't want to do that. And anyway, there were other disagreements. So now it's a lawsuit at UVU, Utah Valley University, which is the largest university in this state. This is where Charlie Kirk was assassinated just a year ago or so. And they invited a commencement speaker, a woman, I forget her name, who posted some negative comments about Charlie Kirk right after the assassination. She did apparently clearly condemn violence, and she said, there's no excuse for that, but he did a lot of harm, and just the fact that he was assassinated does not undo the harm he did. It was some comment like that, and perhaps others that she put out right after he was killed. So there was a pretty big uproar from a lot of people about, like, seriously? Like, how insensitive is that you're inviting that woman to speak on the campus where he was assassinated, who obviously didn't like him and, wasn't respectful in some ways. And they did disinvite her. The pressure became high enough that intense enough that they canceled that, and they didn't replace her. So I guess there's not going to be a commencement speaker this year, which, like, anyway, go figure. Like, people really when they're kind of like numb to the spirit. They're like numb to the spirit, right? In April this month of 2026, the Dominican Sisters of Hawthorne, this is a group of nuns in New York State who operate a free, let me repeat that, free Catholic hospice. So these are, nuns who are running a hospice to take care of people in the last stages of their lives. And they do it for free. And they filed a lawsuit against the New York Governor, Kathy Hochul, and other state officials regarding a 2024 law in New York that mandates transgender care standards in long-term care facilities, meaning that they are mandated to use preferred pronouns and assign rooms based on gender identity rather than biological sex, and to permit access to sex-specific areas like restrooms based on gender identity. So here are these nuns who are for free. I mean, the Catholic Church obviously pays the bill, but they are offering their services. They're certainly not going to be paid more than living expenses, I suppose. And it's to help people who are in the last stages of life. And now New York could fine them or make them disband the whole organization and stop offering these free services to people who are dying, or they could even be imprisoned. And it's like, anyway, you can't make this stuff up. They had sued the state not in a lawsuit, but they had asked the state or petitioned the state to give them a religious exemption. But there was no response given at all to that. So now they are trying to get it taken care of in court. But I mean, we're just seeing this decay. And I've said this before, but just one administrative term or two by more conservative leaders, it's not enough. Like, the rot is pretty deep. And in fact, you see the pushback that becomes stronger and stronger and stronger. Maybe you heard the James Carville interview where, and he's the guy who coined that phrase for Bill Clinton, it's the economy, stupid. So, he was involved with Clinton's campaign and all that. And he's considered this, consistent Democratic strategist and commentator, but he is like, there's not even subtle, but he's like, yeah, that when we're in power, and don't campaign on this, but as soon as we're in power, we need to basically pack the Supreme Court, and make it go up to 13 or something so that they can change the beliefs of the justices, or the preponderance of belief of the justices, and, make Puerto Rico and DC states so that they'll have permanent hold of the Senate and, things like that. So he's just like, but don't run on it. So, and yet he says it in the open, and then he says, but don't run on this. And then as soon as you're in, you're just going to have to do it so that you have permanent control. So again, it's an interesting time where things are just so aggressive and no collaboration. I mean, we're in a government shutdown that is longer than we've ever had before, where so many people are not getting paid, or it's coming out of other funds. Anyway, you've heard this stuff. It's all about power. It's not really about helping the country or trying to pull together even when we disagree. And of course we're going to disagree. That's not the problem. The problem is how we're handling the disagreement. And there's no real effort that's consistent to collaborate for the good of the country, which is tragic. And of course, maybe you heard that Zoran Mamdani, who is the socialist mayor of New York, put out an executive order that there couldn't be any large gatherings in Times Square for a season that includes July 4th, which is the 250th anniversary. They're going to drop the ball like they do on New Year's Eve in Times Square. That's planned for the big 250th anniversary of the United States, or the Declaration of Independence. But they are not going to allow people to come because, anyway. And then, of course, maybe you heard that Kathy Hochul, who is the governor in New York, the night before her election, was at this last-minute campaign event, and told conservatives, "We're here to say the era of Trump and Zeldin and Molinaro, just jump on a bus and head down to Florida where you belong, okay? You're not New Yorkers. Get out of town." So she was very, you can hear it. It's on video, easy to find, and it's been circulating again lately, because now that they've had so many people go to Florida or other places from New York for lower taxes, for more business-friendly environments, their tax base has been eroded, and she was on an interview acknowledging that that has happened and that they need people to come back to be taxed, and she even mentioned, before COVID, people had to be here, but then at COVID, a lot of people started working remotely, so they don't have to be here anymore, and they've left, and we need them to come back, and if you have, friends that have gone to Florida, ask them to come back so that they can be taxed heavily and fund their what she calls generous social programs. Yeah, yeah, generous. Anyway, and of course you've heard about all the but I mean, it's just so funny that people act like there's no digital world out there that keeps track. You can't look up these whole videos and put them side by side and go like, yeah, which is the real person here? I mean, or how silly that they will acknowledge in a way, but in a backhanded way, that their policies aren't working, but they won't really change their policies. And of course, the big thing is tax the rich, right? Which has become such a popular term amongst progressives. And the progressives are really growing and being more vocal in that party and catching the attention of a lot of the voters, and many of them are being elected. So, of course, that never works. You don't tax your way into prosperity. Money moves, as has been said a million times. So, I mean, I hope we talk to our children about this because it's a very popular thing that just the 1% could cover everything. And honestly, the math doesn't even work. Even if you took more of their money, almost all their money, it still wouldn't like cover the national debt or, fund Medicare or whatever. Anyway, they've done all those calculations and it's not even true that it would work, but it's a very popular rallying cry for that side of the political spectrum. And when they try it, this is what happens. I mean, maybe you heard they did decide to do a pied à terre tax in New York City for like second homes that are sometimes empty. And that is trying to, tax the wealthy, as they say in there. And so Mamdani is saying, look, I'm keeping my promises. But I've quoted this before, but George Orwell actually published with the socialist press in England in his early writing career, in his young adult years. But then he spent a lot of time in Eastern Europe, the communist bloc, Ukraine and USSR, and he wrote about being there, and that really changed his politics completely. Of course, he's the author of 1984 and Animal Farm, which I understand they're making a movie of, but I haven't got details on that. At any rate, he came up with this great observation. He said, this socialists don't love the poor. And that's what had appealed to him. And it appeals to many. They think it's this humanitarian thing. We're going to, make the rich pay for the poor. And yet what he found, exposing himself to the actuality of socialism, was that socialists don't love the poor. They just hate the rich. And sure enough, that fits dramatically what we're seeing in some of these enclaves where socialism is gaining traction. And then maybe remember Margaret Thatcher's great insight. The trouble with socialism is that you eventually run out of other people's money. Certainly true. Okay. I'm going to go on with a few more headlines. Alan Dershowitz, you may know that name. He was the youngest law professor ever at Harvard. Now he's, retired a long time. But he has defended some very high-profile defendants. He was on the defense team for O.J. Simpson, for Jim Baker, the televangelist who did serve some prison time, remember? Harvey Weinstein, the big sexual predator in Hollywood and so on. Jeffrey Epstein, and Donald Trump. He was on his defense team too, and he was fighting off some legal charges. Anyway, but he publicly announced, and he's a lifelong Democrat, and has, often stated that. Intelligent man, when he would be asked to weigh in on some political things in the past, he, has certainly had a lot of Democrat leanings, but he was at least rational. He always would bring in some rationale that was, you could track it. And it was, whether or not you agreed with it, he tried to be a voice of reason within his framework of belief. And so I always appreciated that. At any rate, a while ago, I think last year sometime, he publicly announced that he was not going to be registered as a Democrat anymore because and it was all about their Israel policy and how pro-Palestinian they have been. And recently he announced that he's going to register as a Republican, which is a real switch. And he says, I still don't believe in a lot of the Republican policies, I think, on immigration and abortion and things like that. He's still, more in line with Democrats, but he can't stand their policy against Israel. He is Jewish. And so that went public the other day. And I had seen near that announcement, maybe just a day or so before, I'd seen a new poll that showed that the younger generation, I mean, they showed several different demographics, but the one that struck me was that the younger generation of voters, I don't know, it was like 18 to 29 or whatever the range was, that 75% of them express pro-Palestinian support. And only 25-ish, I mean, I'm rounding, but it was about that kind of distribution, like 3-1 favor Palestine over Israel. And this, again, is fulfillment of prophecy. Like, that all nations shall turn against Israel. I mean, we are living in that day. Some people think like, well, no, because not every, well, I don't know. I think every nation, and certainly it's like the writing is on the wall when it comes to these younger voting blocks that are coming into the political arena. I mean, I think we can tell what's happening. On a lighter note and kind of clever, I was impressed by the thinking out of the box here. The U.S. Transportation Secretary, Sean Duffy, had announced that the agency was going to recruit gamers to be air traffic controllers. I mean, this is a brilliant move. I actually was impressed. I hope it works out. Apparently on Roblox, an online gaming platform that's huge. It has like 151 million daily active users, so it's huge. They can manage and direct, like the gamers can manage and direct pixelated air traffic through an air traffic control simulator, and they're very successful at it. So they kind of ran some test games, I guess, and then the federal government opened it up for applications, and they were hoping for 8,000 applications. Within 24 hours, they got 12,000 applications. 11,000 were considered qualified. So there were a few that didn't really make the cut but had applied nonetheless. This is brilliant. I hope it works. Another really great thing here was Clarence Thomas, the Supreme Court Justice, who is probably getting close to retirement, and he will be missed. In an address to the University of Texas, gave a beautiful tribute and defense of the Declaration of Independence, which is, again, in sort of celebration of our 250th anniversary here in the United States. And it was really great, and he was really trying to inspire these young people to recognize how blessed we are, basically, to have this as a founding document, what it means, what it doesn't mean. And he made a very clear condemnation of progressivism, which he said clearly does not align with the founding principles. And he went to some extent to explain that. So that's a nice speech if you want to catch a summary of it, even, or listen to that. Of course, we have new names now for the Young Men's Program. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I don't get it. Maybe it'll work out just great. I mean, I've been wrong before, but, they're kind of a mouthful. And I don't know. I think we need simple. So, I don't know. And the first two end with faith and hope, but the third one ends with light, the oldest girls. And so it's faith, hope, and light. And I thought they could have made it faith, hope, and charity, which would have had a nice tie-in, but whatever. Anyway, maybe you know that the president of El Salvador, who has been criticized for being too authoritarian, I don't know the details here, so I'm not, it does sound like he's done some questionable things, but he has brought the murder rate down in El Salvador ever since he's been in office. And he made this interesting statement: if you don't impeach the corrupt judges, you cannot fix the country. I think that's going to resonate with a lot of us, right? They will form a cartel and block all reforms, this is ringing bells, protecting the systemic corruption that put them in their seats. So he went in and removed the people on the Supreme Court in El Salvador and has, removed the other judges as well. So he's taking his own advice. And he's very popular. I mean, he has a very high approval rating amongst the native El Salvadorians. And he has worked with Trump. I mean, apparently they don't agree on everything, but they have collaborated on some of the deportation, that the immigration in the United States is trying to enforce, and he has accepted back people that are being deported from the United States and putting them in prisons there. So interesting. But thinking of our Book of Mormon judges that, of course, we have read about many times and their corruption, especially in Helaman 8 and 3 Nephi 6 and 7, it talks about how the Nephite leaders who belong to the Gadianton robbers, again, it's just ringing a bell. Nephite leaders, so the leaders of the country who belong to the Gadianton robbers, prioritizing power, bribery. Think of all the fraud going on and how a lot of that money turns up back in the campaign donations to the corrupt politicians that allowed the fraud to happen or, winked at it so that they didn't have to do anything about it. At any rate, power, bribery, and secret combinations over righteousness. They opposed prophets like Nephi, the son of Helaman, and upheld unfair laws to protect their positions, leading to the collapse of the Nephite government into tribal anarchy. So along the lines of the fraud, maybe you heard that there is a California state law or bill that is being considered by the legislature that's being nicknamed the Stop Nick Shirley bill. So Nick Shirley is the returned missionary, member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, who has become known in the country because he went to Minnesota and he actually went to the addresses that were supposed to be preschools for the Somali community mostly, and found that they, remember that quality Leering Center that didn't have the N? Anyway, there was nobody there, no kids, anyway, it was fronts for fraud. Well, then he went to California and he started showing up at hospice places and things like that are, again, collecting all kinds of taxpayer money for programs where they're not really delivering the services. They're just collecting the money. So he's doing this kind of on the scene reporting, and they're putting a bill out there where somebody like him who's trying to go and check out those places can be charged with like harassment or invasion of privacy or some stuff like that. So anyway, they're nicknaming it the Stop Nick Shirley bill. So yes, don't point out where we're wasting taxpayer money because, we don't want anybody to know. Of course, you probably heard of the Eric Swalwell scandal. He was a senator from California that was running for governor and was one of the front runners for the Democrats. And he had all these sexual harassment charges that kind of came out against him. And it's almost like they were saying like the whole party knew about it. Probably Republicans did too. And they all just sort of let it go until they figured he was too dangerous to support and that it might come out in an inopportune time. So that's, anyway, who knows? But it almost looked calculated because all these charges all these women came forward and it was given all kinds of traction. Of course, everybody acted like they never knew this before, even though everybody knew that he had been in one of those honeypot traps that, like some Chinese spy was sleeping with him. And he's been married all these years. Anyway, ugly, ugly stuff. And this brought again to the forefront that there is a slush fund for Congress that uses taxpayer dollars to pay settlements for people who are alleging sexual harassment by a member of Congress. And since 1997, they're telling us that they spent about $18 million on settlements. $18 million. Your money and my money if you're in the United States paying taxes. So for almost 30 years, that's $500,000 a year. More than that, really. And then there was a vote in Congress that was basically, they kind of framed it a different way, but it was basically whether or not to release the information about who had had settlements made for them. In other words, who had been accused of sexual improprieties. Now, I realize that there can be false allegations made, so we shouldn't condemn people before we have evidence. But $18 million, there's probably some fire behind some of that smoke. And I do sympathize with people who've been falsely accused, and certainly that happens. But they can come forward and they can demonstrate that they're, protest their innocence. I don't know. It just seems like with taxpayer money involved, I guess I wouldn't have minded the transparency, although I recognize that there is, sort of a difficulty there with those who might have been falsely accused. But I'm guessing most of it is at least, there is some fire behind that smoke. Anyway, the vote to keep it private was 357 to 65. Like, I think that's ugly. Representative Nancy Mace from South Carolina was the one who proposed that to try to make it transparent. And it was defeated soundly by both parties. And it reminded me of a book that came out in 1988. I didn't read it, but I read the summary of it. It was called The Best Congress Money Can Buy. So, the title sort of tells it all. And then just today, I think, there dropped the news about the Southern Poverty Law Center, SPLC, that has been a very, very leftist group, nonprofit, of course, that will, talk about hate crimes a lot and white supremacy and how they're trying to eliminate all that. But I think they were indicted by a grand jury. Is that what I heard? Should have looked it up. But anyway, the news has been leaked, and there is apparently quite a bit of substantial evidence that shows that they funded like hate crimes, like, groups to be like campaigning or, demonstrating for white supremacists, the KKK, things like that. But they were funding it so that then they could complain about it. So you pay for a hate crime so you say we have hate crimes in this country. It's terrible. And it makes Jussie Smollett, if you remember that name, it makes him look like an amateur. He faked a hate crime. Was it Michigan? Anyway, so yeah, it makes him look like an amateur. Of course, he got away with it too. And I guess the really tragic thing is that, there just doesn't seem to be any accountability. All this, tempest in a teapot stuff, it hits the news and then the cycle changes and it's gone. But the corruption just keeps going. And when was the last time anybody went to prison for some of this stuff? Like, that's the killer, right? And yet the Lord has told us, He has told us to not expect justice in this sphere, but that justice will be coming. And that is what keeps us sane, right? Hopefully, is to realize that, like, the time isn't yet. The time isn't yet, but the time will come. And nobody gets away with anything, which again should point us to, then I'm not getting away with anything either. And I might as well just tend my own garden because, I have hard enough time doing that sometimes. And it's worth focusing on that and not letting this stuff eat us up, because it can, and it can make us bitter or angry, and it's not worth it. It is not worth it. In due time, brothers and sisters, the secret acts of men will be shouted from the housetops, and everything will be just in the end. Everything will be just. And we all need the justice, and we all need the mercy as well. So I wasn't able to get my own word sacrament reading last Sunday, but I did get to the noon meeting, and always glad to take the sacrament. But as I was leaving, I saw a family in our ward's home has a flagpole, and that flag was being flown upside down, which, maybe is military code for severe distress, like immediate danger. And I wanted to check to see if I was remembering that right, because I read it, ages ago. And sure enough, in fact, I texted my friend that lives there and said, just check, is everybody okay? I noticed your flag. And she said, my husband's just fed up. Like, anyways, I looked it up to make sure I was remembering that right. It did say that now it's been used as a protest sign. I guess I just hadn't seen anybody doing it before, but makes sense. People are sad about what is happening, but justice is coming. And as it says, what people will say that Christ delayeth his coming. Well, we're saying that, but not really, because he will come in the season that is right and perfect, as everything else in the plan is timed perfectly. Just, I don't see it. So it's hard. I have to take that leap of faith to say, like, I'm going to trust that this is best. Not that evil is best, not that God doesn't care about evil. Of course he does, but he's not worried by it because he knows what's coming, and he knows that everything will work out. Not just all right, but like amazingly. We're going to be dumbfounded and awe-filled at how magnificent the Lord's doings are, how God's plan is our Father's plan, how amazing, how generous, how just, how perfect, how merciful. Okay, in the book of Numbers, this is the one I remember. There are a lot of great stories in Numbers, but when I think about Numbers, the only verse that I really remember that I know comes from Numbers is this one. I meant to look it up a long time ago because I would refer to it occasionally, and I thought, I should go look the chapter up. It's right here in 11, the first chapter that we're supposed to look at, which is chapter 11, verse 11. I should be able to remember that. We'll see. And I paraphrase it because I don't look it up. But Moses said unto the Lord, Wherefore hast thou afflicted thy servant? And wherefore have I not found favor in thy sight, that thou layest the burden of all this people upon me? Like, what have I ever done to deserve the children of Israel? That is what he's saying. And he says again, have I conceived all this people? Like, have I begotten them? Are they my children? That thou shouldst say unto me, carry them in thy bosom? Verse 13, whence should I have flesh to give it to all this people? For they weep unto me, saying, anyway, I'm not able to bear all this people alone. This is verse 14, because it is too heavy for me. Verse 15, and if thou deal thus with me, this is the part that I really remember. If thou deal thus with me, kill me, I pray thee, out of hand, if I have found favor in thy sight. If you care about me, if you're happy with me, just kill me now. Boy, I could echo that in some ways. And let me not see my wretchedness. Like, just end my suffering rather than afflict me with the people of Israel. This is at the beginning of the 40 years that they wander in the wilderness. And they rebel at the drop of a hat. So anyway, my heart goes out to Moses, who is an amazing character. He's an amazing character. You can see how he's an archetype for the Savior himself. What he does for his people under the direction of the Father and Jesus Christ, the steward over this earth, is amazing. And we were going to read here, I forget which chapter it is, it's the next chapter, 12, that Moses is the most meek of all men. Appropriately restrained power. He is willing to submit his will to the Father's perfectly, and then he is the vehicle for all kinds of power. We saw it in Egypt. We saw the parting of the Red Sea. We see it on Sinai. We see it all through the wilderness. It's amazing what Moses is to these people, but he's just like, if you have any love for me at all, just kill me now. And sometimes you get 40 years, brothers and sisters. That's what we need to submit to trust that the Lord has a purpose, that he sees what we do not see. And if we could see what he sees and understand it, that we would agree. I don't see there's another way to get through this without becoming, kind of shriveled in our bitterness. It's so easy if you don't keep going to the trust. I'm going to trust that he knows what I don't know. And he knows better, that his ways truly are higher. Anyway, of course, they're always saying this, right? It was well with us in Egypt. They were slaves with a tally of bricks to do every day. And yet, it was better for us and how quickly they forget, And again, we'll talk about that at the end, kind of this pattern. But anyway, Moses responds with variations of this throughout the history that he experiences with these people. Verse 23 of chapter 11, the Lord said unto Moses, is the Lord's hand waxed short? Like, you think I can't answer these prayers? You think I can't meet these needs? But he does allow, trouble to come. So I don't want to go through all the details of every time they complain, but we'll kind of skim over the surface of this. Again, chapter 12, I'm going to say here, verse 3, the man Moses was very meek above all the men which were upon the face of the earth. And meekness, hopefully, is taking on this really wonderful meaning for us as we think about God's omnipotence and how he wants to share that with us, but it's on conditions of restraint, meekness, using it when it's right, not using it when it's not right, being patient and submissive to the Lord and the purposes of the Lord and the fulfillment of the needs for the plan to move forward. Okay, so there's a nice statement that he makes actually at the end of chapter 11 saying, would that all the Lord's people were prophets. because somebody's complaining that somebody's prophesying. It'd be good if everybody had that spirit of revelation, because it is available, right? Chapter 13, he sends one spy from every tribe to go scout out the land of Canaan. So they have, they've gone from Sinai all the way to Canaan here. And they now are poised to enter the promised land. And as we mentioned before, it was very clearly stated in the scriptures that when Jacob and Joseph are prophesying, they're saying, that of course the people are going to be, in Egypt for a long time because the iniquity of the Canaanites is not full. So this land that is going to be this land flowing with milk and honey and promised to the seed of Abraham is full of people who are not yet ripened unto iniquity, ready for destruction. So they're not quite at the level of Sodom and Gomorrah yet. So God is saying, like, this is going to work fine. We're going to keep you in Egypt for a while, and then they're going on this collision course with destruction in Canaan. And by the time I send you there, they'll be ready to be, cleansed from the land. Because again, as we've said, the spirits that come into those cultures often don't have an opportunity even to exercise agency before they're corrupted. So it's perfect timing. But the people of Israel are faithless. And these spies come back and they all say, oh, it is a land flowing with milk and honey. But, oh, the inhabitants are so scary, we don't dare go in. The only ones who say differently are Caleb and Joshua, that were also amongst those spies or scouts that were sent in. And they say, like, yeah, it is a land flowing with milk and honey. And yeah, the inhabitants look strong, but with the Lord, we can take care of it. Like, it's promised to us. Like, it'll be fine. We just need to have faith. And of course, the people rebel. Should have left this in Egypt. Gee, they can't come up with much more original stuff than that, but they repeat it often. So God says, then that's it. You're not going to set foot in there. Verse 11, how long will this people provoke me? Now, these are rhetorical questions. The Lord knows exactly how long they will do that. And how long will it be ere they believe me for all the signs which I have shewed among them? These questions are for us. God has the answers, but he wants us to consider all of this. Like, how long do we, ignore the Lord or provoke him in our faithlessness or rebellion when we are children of the covenant, when we have access to the Spirit, to the power that he wants to give us if we will just meet the criteria that he gives, which is gentle and allows us to grow in a more complete way. Anyway, how long before we believe him for all the signs which he has shown unto us? And we've talked about, don't miss the real miracles. So anyway, and I love this verse. This is verse 18 of chapter 14. The Lord is long-suffering and of great mercy, forgiving iniquity and transgression. Now, look at this great statement. And by no means clearing the guilty. So no teddy bear Jesus here. He's saying, yes, the Lord is long-suffering and has great mercy, like in a way that is beyond our even ability to comprehend. But while he will forgive those who repent, he by no means clears the guilty. If people don't repent, they have to suffer, even as the Lord suffered in hell. And then in his great mercy, hell is temporary. Anyway, I'm going to skip some of these beautiful things. But verse 22, all those men which have seen my glory. Now he's talking about this faithless generation, 20 and older, that were at the base of Sinai, that crossed through on dry land, through the Red Sea, all that. All these men which have seen my glory and my miracles, which I did in Egypt and in the wilderness, and have tempted me now these 10 times, and have not hearkened to my voice. Verse 23, surely they shall not see the land which I sware unto their fathers, neither shall any of them that provoked me see it. And then he says, but my servant Caleb, because he has another spirit with him, and have followed me fully, him will I bring into the land. And that's what happens. Caleb and Joshua are the only two of that generation that cross over Jordan into the promised land. Anyway, he's very colorful in the language here. Verse 29, your carcasses shall fall in the wilderness from 20 years and upward, which have murmured against me. Okay, so the people are all sad, but it's like, yeah, anyway. What they asked for, they eventually got, which was, not to go into that land. Let's see, chapter 16, let's look at that for a second. Oh, here's another rebellion. It names some specific men, and 250 leaders rebel and seek priestly offices. They want what Aaron has been promised will be the Aaronic priesthood through his direct descendants, right? But now they're like, why should he have it and we don't? And there's another rebellion. And so the earth swallows some of the leaders and then fire consumes the rest. So we lose a few more. And then Israel murmurs again. So the Lord sends a plague and, almost 15,000 die. So again, you can see why the numbers didn't really increase. They lost a few from the census at Sinai to the census before they go into Canaan. But they just don't want to do it the Lord's way. That's what happens again and again. There's another test in chapter 17. Some of these are not in our reading, but, just doing a quick skim is sort of interesting. Chapter 17, again, they're challenging the authority of Moses and Aaron. Like, why should we follow you? Who made you in charge? All of this stuff again. So the Lord tells him what to do, tells Moses to say, tell every tribe leader to bring a rod, like a stick, that we will put in the tabernacle overnight. In the morning, we're going to see if any of them have budded. And of course, none of them have except for the rod of Aaron. And that one has not only budded, but bloomed, and it's even given almonds. So it's pretty quick transition into fruit, right? So they're like, okay, fine. But they're just, the challenge is constantly there. Who are you? Don't believe they speak for the Lord. Now, again, and we hear this a lot, don't we, today? Is like, well, but, the prophets, do they really speak for the Lord? And again, we're not saying our prophets are infallible. That is not our doctrine. But we are saying that, at least this is what our doctrine teaches, that God works through his prophets, and that his prophets are called and set apart and anointed to be the spokesperson for God, to be his prophet, to be the leader of his people, and to hold the keys, all the keys. They're all in the 12, but they're all in the prophet, and he holds the keys. So, how much do we murmur against that and say, well, I don't really like that message, or I don't really like the approach here? And it might be, prophets in the past that get hammered for various things, that it's kind of like, well, again, do we believe the Lord is governing this church or not? Again, I recognize there's a space there where we're saying that it doesn't mean they're infallible, but God directs his kingdom, does he not? I know we have to come to our place with that. Chapter 19, again, not in our reading, but this is where the red heifer sacrifice is explained and described. And this is the one that Israel has been, the Orthodox Jews in Israel have been planning on. We don't know if it occurred or not, because the fact that they had bought these red heifers that weren't naturally available in the Middle East, but they bought them from a Christian cattleman in Texas who knew about the prophecy. So he was breeding deliberately red heifers, and then they, made this deal so that they were taken to Israel, and they have to get to a certain age, and they have to not have too much white or black hair on them. It has to really be red, and they can never have a yoke on them and all of this. So they met that criteria, and they announced that they were going to do this red heifer sacrifice. And it was even sort of one picture on the internet, who knows if it was the real deal or not, that was this altar with a ramp for the cattle and whatever, and it was supposed to be portable so they could take it down, whatever. Anyway, they were following the instructions here in this chapter of the book of Numbers, chapter 19. And then that was on a video made by one of the leaders of Hamas, who was part of the October 7th massacre, said that one of the instigators for them to do this heinous massacre was the red heifer sacrifice. So anyway, I guess my question is, like, did they go ahead and do it, but they just didn't publicize it because of that kind of reaction on the part of their enemies? So I don't know. Maybe it's still in the offing. It was seen as such a threat to Muslims because it's in conjunction with the rebuilding of the temple. And the temple site is where the Dome of the Rock mosque is. Alaska is the name in Islam, but it's the Dome of the Rock. It's like this incredibly beautiful building, all kinds of mosaics and stuff. But yeah, so in order for the temple to be rebuilt, that mosque is going to have to be wiped. So it is seen as, contentious territory. And I understand that, but the Jews aren't like dropping bombs on it. If anybody's dropping a bomb, it's probably going to come from their enemies. Anyway, could all change in a quick way, but it's not changed yet. Chapter 20, Miriam dies. They run out of water again. They want to go back to Egypt. Shocker there that they say that again. Moses strikes the rock. It's an interesting statement in the footnote there that he didn't speak to the rock, so that he wasn't following God's exact direction there. And in verse 12, the Lord says, because he believed me not to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel. But in the footnote, it's basically because you didn't just speak to the rock, you smote the rock. Therefore, you shall not bring this congregation into the land which I have given them, meaning that Moses and Aaron won't cross over. Well, Aaron dies at the end of this chapter anyway, but Moses doesn't. I don't know about that. I mean, again, not saying I can, that I have an official position in any way on this topic, but I guess I don't think God is petty. In fact, I would strongly reject any notion that he is petty. And while there might be more to this than I understand, obviously we have a condensed record in the entire Old Testament, and most scripture is fairly condensed. It seems like there must be more to it than this. And what I suspect is that, first of all, Moses said right there in Numbers 11:11 that, if you love me at all, just can you let me go? And so I think his mission was fulfilled before they enter Canaan. And a tremendous mission it was, which he in meekness followed. Was he perfect? No, we're not saying that, but wow, such an incredible character. And faithful, communing with God, archetype of the Savior. So I guess unless there's more to it, and there could be, this seems like there was probably something else going on, because I don't think the Lord would say, hey, you shouldn't have hit the rock. You should have just spoken to it. And because of that, I'm punishing you by not letting you go to Canaan. Remember, and this, of course, will be, I think, next week that we'll see where this happens, but we only know from Latter-day Revelation that Moses didn't die. Joshua takes the children of Israel into Canaan. Moses doesn't die. Why? Because Moses holds the keys of the gathering of Israel. And he will come back with a body. He has to have hands prior to the resurrection, because Christ is still on the earth. When Christ takes Peter, James, and John, basically the first presidency that will take over after Christ's death and resurrection, and he gives them the keys on the Mount of Transfiguration, and they come from the people who held the keys. So all of the ones who held the keys had to have hands to confer those keys on Peter, James, and John, and the resurrection hadn't happened yet. So they had to be translated, which allows them to maintain their physical body in a quickened state. They're no longer living on this earth, but they are not separated from their bodies. Moses, Elijah, and Elias needed to transfer those keys. They also come back to Kirtland to transfer those keys to Joseph Smith. But that's after the resurrection. So they could have been resurrected for that purpose, but not on the Mount of Transfiguration. They had to still have bodies. God is so exact. Again, I don't know why we would ever bet against him. He knows what he's doing. He doesn't miss the details. So Moses is not going to cross into the promised land because that's not his mission. He has accomplished his mission. Anyway, that's my thought. Yeah, Aaron dies at the end of that chapter. Chapter 21, there's going to be a shocker. They want to go back to Egypt. Anyway, then we get the fiery serpents, and Moses brings another symbol that is an archetype and a symbol of Christ, the brazen serpent. This serpent formed out of brass on the top of a staff. And all they had to do was look, and they would have been healed, but many of them didn't look, so a bunch of them die there too. Now, obviously, this is such a vivid story and part of their history that Nephi talks about it. And we get a little more information from Nephi. And then Alma talks about it again in his book, that they didn't look because they didn't believe they could be healed. So, we've got to have the faith and the trust. God will come with his invitations and his arms outstretched toward us, but we have to be willing to receive that through our faith, through our trust and belief and our obedience. So they start actually encountering some Canaanites before they cross over, and the Canaanites have ripened in iniquity. Then there's this interesting few chapters about Balaam, who is a kind of prophet because he does say things and they come true. And so here comes one of the Canaanite kings who sends his people and says, I'll pay you lots of money to come and curse Israel because we can see that they're headed our way. And now remember, the Canaanites are corrupt. So don't feel sorry for the king here. Is it Barak or Balak or something like that? And he wants Balaam to curse him. And anyway, he has to send people a lot of times. Balaam says, no, I can only do what God says. But then he kind of wants the money. And so he takes the journey there to where the king is, and he's on his ass, and they encounter, this. I mean, Balaam can't see it, but the ass sees this fiery angel with a sword, and he stops. And Balaam is hitting his poor donkey and telling him, why aren't you going forward? And then the donkey speaks to him. Interesting little story here where he says, why are you doing that? Haven't I served you well all this time? Like, I'm not going forward because I can't, I mean, it would kill you. And actually, the angel says, I would have spared the donkey because the donkey is innocent. But you're the one who is going to curse Israel for money or fame or power that he's giving? No. And so anyway, he says, go, but here the Lord's going to give you what to say. But Balaam has kind of shown his hand that, he can be enticed by worldly things. And he actually goes into these different positions. I think it's 3 places. He goes with the king of the Canaanite group. And after God had told him not to do it, and he goes, but now the angel lets him go, and he gives, instead of cursing, what comes out of him is a blessing and some prophesying about Israel and how great a nation it will be and so on. So, in fact, in chapter 24, Balaam uses this 2 names of Christ. A star out of Jacob. I don't think I remembered that one. I had it underlined, but, there's so many. A star out of Jacob. That's a reference to Christ. And a scepter out of Israel. That one I'm more familiar with, but I like that star out of Jacob. I had forgotten that one. And then there's another census in chapter 26. As I've mentioned a few times, Caleb and Joshua are the only adult males who survived from Sinai to now the cusp of Canaan, ready to cross Jordan. And on the west side of Jordan here that they have already arrived to, they give some inheritance already to a few of the tribes, and it details that in the book of Numbers. Then when Israel goes up against the Midianites, because they are starting to get ready to enter this Canaanite land, and they defeat the Midianites, Balaam is killed. There's a little note there that he is killed in that conflict. Chapter 33, they are commanded to drive out the Canaanites, and any who remain, it says, will vex Israel. And that's exactly what happens because they never fulfill the mandate. They are commanded to destroy the Canaanites. They have ripened in iniquity. It's not useful to send more spirits into those cultures. They're so corrupt. Again, a lot of their worship of these idols is sexual in nature, or they are either sacrificing their children into the belly of the fire god. Like, they are a corrupt culture. And God is accomplishing 2 things here. It's time to stop those cultures from having more spirits come in. And this is the land that I promised. And we waited until they were ready to be eliminated because they had finally ripened. And now, if you do that, then you get this land flowing with milk and honey that I've promised to Abraham and his people. So, it was a good plan, but the Israelites never completed. And sure enough, those who remain vex Israel, meaning that they mingle with them, they adopt their idolatry and their corrupt practices, and eventually it leads to the Assyrians coming down and taking the northern kingdom. The 10 tribes are lost, and then a little while later, it's probably around 100 years later, I forget, but the southern kingdom is taken captive by Babylon, and they are never a free country again until 1949, when the state of Israel is established. Did I get that date right? I haven't looked it up for a while, but it's 48, 49. Anyway, we'll have to check that. But after the war, of course, they start to flood in to Israel because they say no other country will protect us. That's a long time that they didn't have their own country when they were promised to have a land of their own and a nation that could be great and made great by the Lord if they would obey him. Same thing that is the promise of America, which was sort of the modern day Israel in terms of God's, you know, inspiring the foundation of this nation. This is the spot of the restoration of the gospel. It has been a very blessed land. And then, but if we don't worship the God of the land, who's Jesus Christ, as I said, some people are returning to Christ. That's a great thing. So let's just think for a second. What do we do? What's going on here? Like, do we respond like they do again? Maybe not to this magnitude, but when things go wrong, because things go wrong. Like, okay, they're tired of eating manna, which, I can even sympathize with that. Right? It's a miracle. Every single day they're seeing this miracle that they just have food available that keeps them and sustains it. Their clothes don't get old. But they get tired of the manna. And again, okay, I suppose if you ate oatmeal every day, all day, that maybe it would get, you get kind of tired of that. But they complain, and then God gives them quail until they can choke on it. But it's always this, like, why didn't you leave us back in Egypt? Or then they add to that, or at least in the wilderness. Why didn't we just perish in Egypt or in the wilderness rather than, you bring us here for these difficulties? And it seems that what's going on in a way is, first of all, they don't know God. With all that they have witnessed, they don't connect with him. They don't feel attached to him. They don't feel dependent on him. So they have this kind of tunnel vision where, you've got the blinders on and they only see a very limited view of life. And let me hypothesize a little. It seems to me like they want life on sort of cruise control. They want things to be easy. Well, again, can we sympathize with that? Sure. Sure. It's nice when times are good. We're in the last days, so I don't think too many of us are feeling that everything is easy in our lives. But at any rate, if we expect our lives to be smooth sailing without major difficulties, and then a difficulty arises, okay, I guess that's when people complain. But a lot of it has to do with their expectations. And that's not what the plan is about. I've said many times that I wish we would talk about mortality this way. What we typically say when we're teaching the plan of salvation as members of the church is we came to earth for two reasons: to get a body and to be tested. And as I've said before, I think it would be more accurate to say we came to get a body and the body is the test. Are we going to be able to learn to handle our bodies, or will our bodies handle us? This is the tension between spirit and flesh. And it's not about hating the flesh or hating the body. It's a great gift. But it is about approaching the stature of God, who is a glorified man, who has a spirit and a body perfectly harmonized to truth, goodness, mercy, all the perfect things. And that is what he is inviting us to do, is to harmonize our spirit with our flesh. But that means the flesh can't be in charge, that the natural man and the appetites can't be in charge. So here we have these people who, again, have this sort of tunnel vision where it's about comfort. They want their natural man to be comfortable. They want their appetites to be fulfilled in the way that's pleasant to them. And, they seem to forget that their time in Egypt was onerous. It was not pleasant. But when they're faced with some trouble, we're tired of manna. We don't think Moses and Aaron should be in charge. We don't have water. We want the priesthood too. The people of Canaan are terrible. It doesn't matter if God promises this land, we'll never make it. Whatever the complaint is, their immediate response is to say, like, you should have just left us alone. Like, they don't have this connection with God. They don't know what he is offering them. Not that Moses hasn't explained it many times. And in the rituals of the law of Moses, they are reminded constantly, but they look beyond the mark and get caught in the weeds. So they really never connect with God and what God is offering them. So they don't have any faith. They don't have any trust, with the few exceptions that we have noted, and they're not many. But the same circumstances existed. So again, can we be different from the crowd? If we choose, no matter how difficult the circumstances are, if we respond differently, we get a different outcome. So not expecting life to be, the Deseret cruise or smooth sailing helps, but recognizing that each of the difficulties is an opportunity to close the distance between ourselves and God, that we can come closer to him. So another thing that occurred to me is, again, that they don't know God and they don't feel his love. They don't recognize how dependent they are, that we all are on him for everything. King Benjamin, of course, teaches the same thing. Like, he's given us everything. And then all he asks us to obey his commandments. And if we do that, he immediately blesses us. Like, we wouldn't exist without him. We're so in his debt. And then he just asks us to follow him, which gives us the chance to fulfill our potential. It doesn't mean we'll be without stretching, without burdens to strengthen us spiritually, but it means that we will magnify our reason for being here and become conformed to the image of Christ. Like, these are huge opportunities if we have a perspective that is eternal instead of these blinders or tunnel vision. Anyway, Sunday when I was in the Fifth Ward, which is not my word, but anyway, it was a nice meeting. We sang a new hymn, one of the new ones that's called Because. And I think I'd heard it once before. We didn't sing it very well, but the chorus was easier. And anyway, the message of this, well, let me get back to that. But anyway, you'll hear the words are so beautiful. This is the chorus. I will praise forever the Savior of the world, and I will sing together with all the saints on earth, because he gave to me everything he had to give. I breathe, I see, I hope, I love, I live. Let me repeat the last few lines of that. Because he gave to me everything he had to give, I breathe, I see, I hope, I love, I live. And it's a touching song. I mean, it's easy to get a little teary as we contemplate those beautiful words. That's an understanding that every breath we take, every beat of our hearts, depends on the gifts of the Lord. Everything good is because of him and from him, because he loves us. I've always loved that verse in the New Testament that we love him because he first loved us. Loving him is a privilege. It's a natural outcome of coming to know him, because we become more and more aware of how great he is and how little we are. And this, of course, again, remind me of King Benjamin, who, this is from Isaiah 4, his great sermon. For behold, if the knowledge of the goodness of God at this time has awakened you to a sense of your nothingness and your worthless and fallen state, I say unto you, if ye have come to a knowledge of the goodness of God and his matchless power and his wisdom and his patience and his long-suffering towards the children of man, and also the atonement. Anyway, he continues in that vein, but look at the connection, and I love this connection. It's the knowledge of the goodness of God that awakens us to a sense of our nothingness. Like, if we don't know who he is, we don't realize how dependent we are. And we vaunt ourselves and think, mine own arm hath done this, and look at me, and I don't need God because I'm like all cool. And that's foolishness. That's the natural man on steroids. And this is what happened to these people. They didn't know the goodness of God. They didn't accept it or receive it. And of course, it takes awareness and gratitude, because we always have things to complain about. Like, if that's what we want to do, there's no end to the things we can moan about. I almost used a nasty word. We can murmur against, but we could focus instead on how great he is and all that he promises that is beyond anything we could ever truly hope for of our own strength. I mean, we're puny creatures who have been given divine potential because of our Father and his goodness and graciousness towards his children. He didn't have to even offer us the deal to become his spirit children, but he takes joy in allowing unformed intelligence to progress and be able to experience, if we choose, a fullness of joy forever with the ones that we love. But if we don't recognize how great he is, we don't recognize how dependent we are. And then we're going to complain instead of praising God and his glory, even in our pain, even in our trials, even in our season in the wilderness, or our time in the valley of the shadow, which is surely a part of life. And as prophesied, in the last days, it ramps up. But we are sent here because we can do it if we turn to him and rely on him. Now, again, same message is in Moses 1, in the Pearl of Great Price, where Moses, in his encounter that begins this last 40 years of his life, basically, when he's a shepherd in Midian, and he encounters the burning bush. And as he explains in Moses 1, the glory of God is so great that he passes out for hours. And when he comes to, first thing he says, "For this cause I know that man is nothing," which thing I had never before supposed. He didn't have that connection that King Benjamin teaches until then. He was a good man. Obviously, the Lord would not have called him had he not been trying to be a good man. And he had left being a prince of Egypt because he was trying to stand up for Hebrew slaves. And they didn't even, want that. They were going to tell on him. Anyway, so after this successful, prosperous career, he goes into this wilderness, and he's willing to be a shepherd and marry and have a family with a Jethro, who is a good man, his father-in-law. And then he has this call in the burning bush. And again, that's the first message. God is great. I am nothing. And what my point is that if we recognize that, as King Benjamin says, if we realize how good he is, how great he is, then we're going to recognize how dependent we are upon him, and then how grateful we can be for everything, because we no longer vaunt ourselves. We no longer think we're all that. And that's the beginning of wisdom, right? That's when we start to have a clue about this life is better if I do it his way. And it's merciful and kind, and the reward is, what does he tell us? "I hath not seen, neither ear heard, neither hath entered into the heart of man the things that God hath prepared for them that love him." He's telling us, it's going to be wonderful, but you don't even have the least understanding of how much I'm going to give you if you will hold on, if you will trust me, if you will worship me, because I do love you. And I know what you can be because of me and my son, Jesus Christ. So Moses gets it. King Benjamin tries to teach it. All the prophets talk about this really in one way or another. Ezra Taft Benson's big thing on pride, right? It was a landmark or watershed speech. What do we say? Beware of pride, because that's the enemy. We're talking about humility, recognizing our own nothingness. And that's like the beginning of our journey in the light. Notice John 17, I quote this all the time, verse 3, "And this is life eternal, that they might know thee, the only true God, and Jesus Christ whom thou hast sent. So again, look at the order of operations. We have to understand how great God is, how good he is, how merciful, how much he loves us, so that we recognize how dependent we are and we stop complaining. I mean, I'm not saying I don't complain occasionally, but I really try not to. I try to fill my words to him with gratitude. I try to catch myself if I say something that sounds ungrateful. And honestly, it's easy to say it. Like, when we say things like, I wish it weren't that way. And I will stop myself and say, no, if this is the way the path has been ordained, if this is the way God has ordained the plan, then I don't want to say, I wish it were different. Because I do trust him and I bow to his greatness. So I'm cautious. I try to be more and more cautious to not say things that are ungrateful. And it doesn't mean I'm happy about what I'm experiencing all the time, because it's hard. But I'm still going to be grateful. If it kills me, I'm going to be grateful because I do worship him. There's another song that I thought of that I used to sing, and there's a really nice duet that I sang with others. And some of you might know this. The King of Love, my shepherd is. It's not just an LDS hymn, but it's a beautiful hymn. I mean, I'm very picky about the songs that I would sing because the words had to be doctrinally accurate and beautiful to me. And of course, you want the music to be lovely, but this is one I have loved. I've sung it more than once over the years in different wards with different people. But there's a part in the chorus that always touches me. Perverse and foolish oft I strayed, and yet in love he sought me, and on his shoulder gently laid, and home rejoicing brought me. Those words have always touched something deep in me. I'm going to say them again. I hope you love them too. And the music is really quite beautiful. Perverse and foolish oft I strayed, and yet in love he sought me, and on his shoulder gently laid, and home rejoicing brought me. I just want to testify, brothers and sisters, that we don't have to be rebellious. It's easy to have our rebellions, even small ones sometimes are not useful. And they're human, but I hope that we work to root them out and that we yield ourselves to the plan and to our great God and our amazing Savior. It can weaken our faith to go through these things. It certainly didn't help these children of Israel. They did not choose a path of growth and strengthening. They chose a path of rejection of all that God was doing for them. They could have reached for him, and we can reach for him more, especially when we feel farther away from him. And I have certainly felt that sometimes, but I've known he was there even when I couldn't feel it. And I knew that in time I would feel it more. And I do. We can really push the gratitude. That's a choice. I'm not, saying this should be fake or we just put the gloss on it. No, I mean genuinely recognizing how dependent we are and how much he offers and how blind we are to what he sees. But again, trusting his greatness, his goodness, not seeing him as harsh or petty or angry. I mean, sure, he has righteous indignation, but he's not like we are about anger. I hope we never make that mistake. And that we repent and improve and seek to be more like him and to follow his son better and better in higher and holier ways. Just, it's a gradual increase. Sometimes we can make some significant progress that we see, and sometimes it's just that day by day yearning and hungering for righteousness. And of course, deepening our trust. I testify that our God is great, that our Savior is a perfect Savior, Redeemer, an omnipotent God who has set his heart upon his people, as has his Father, our Father. We sang this song at my father's funeral. It was one of his favorites, and he had a beautiful voice, so he would sing it. How great thou art. And it was tender. A lot of Spanish speakers, people had come from Mexico, family and others, and a lot of his missionaries came even from, 25 years before. They came from all over the country to be there. So we had a lot of Spanish speakers, and we invited, I think my daughters and I sang the first 2 verses, maybe even the third. But then we invited the congregation to join in. Oh, and we sang one of the verses at least. My daughters and I sang in Spanish and some in English. But anyway, Chris always said that this was something that really touched him, and he thought it was a beautiful moment where the Spirit was really flowing, because the last verse and chorus, we invited the congregation to join in either Spanish or English. And so you could hear both languages singing this incredible anthem with such inspired words, acknowledging the greatness of our God. I love him. I love the Father. I love the Son. I hope we can choose him, choose his glory, and become a Zion-ready people. That day is approaching. May it be soon. Thanks, as ever, to my dear husband, Chris Anderson, and Doug Larson of Point Digital. Take care.